The weird sisters, hand in hand, posters of the sea and land, thus do go about. Act 1, Scene 3. Seaton was lost. He was furious at himself, furious at the moor and the wind and the weather. Every saddle of land, soft with grass but difficult of footing because of hummocks and puddles, looked exactly like the last one. There was no sun to guide him. Over the low-lying land, mist gathered in puffy folds, tangled like piles of shorn wool, tumbling down on Seaton and trying to suffocate him. Twice now he had passed the same tower. At first he thought it was a stone escape turret built by the ancients. Scotland was dotted with these, because hiding places from invaders had been necessary from time immemorial. Now he rode up to it. It was not made by man. It was a huge oak, jaggedly broken off about 20 feet up. Lightning had struck, burning a trail along the trunk and knocking off the top of the tree. Seaton peered through a small cleft at the ground and found that the vast trunk was hollow. If a person could fit through the hole, he could live there. A moment of sun gave Seaton his bearings. He flicked the reins and headed east. He had gone a mile, perhaps 2, when distantly, faintly, he heard his name called. His skin prickled. Was he to meet the weird ones here? He had met them once and brought the gift they required. Even for Seaton, it had taken guts to do it. He felt sick sometimes, remembering it. He owed the weird ones. They had made him first with the new king. They had given him Lady Mary's hand. It was not pleasant to owe witches a favour, but this heath was 100 miles away from those weird ones. Perhaps miles didn't matter to them, or maybe other witches owned this heath. He could not ignore them now. Seaton reined in and looked for the witches. There was only one, and she on horseback. "Seaton!" called the rider. "Seaton!" He could not believe his eyes. It was Lady Mary. The multiplying villainies of nature do swarm upon him. Act 1, Scene 2. "I followed you!" Mary cried gaily, so he would think that her journey had been a joy and a privilege. Then she pouted. "You didn't even pause to say goodbye to me. I thought we were becoming close." Clearly, he had no idea what to do with her. And just as clearly, he was touched and thrilled that she had followed him. Mary tried to use this. "My place is beside you," she pleaded. He regarded her uncertainly. Mary dismounted to make it harder for him to continue east. "Oh, Seaton, so many have abandoned the king. I was so afraid you were abandoning him and me both. We have such a future ahead of us. No one will have seen that we ran. Come, let's go back and catch up with the wagon train." She had made an error, accusing him of running. "I would never run. Never. I have a commission from the king. You should not have left the baggage train. The moor is dangerous. Your place is beside our queen." I am to be married to him anyway, thought Mary. I have seen what married people do. Well, actually I haven't, but I have seen what horses do. Perhaps that will keep Seaton from riding on. Mary stroked Seaton's thigh. But riding so hard, so fast had left her windblown. Her cloak and gown were in disarray. "You're carrying a dagger," said Seaton. Her hand flew to the knife of Malcolm or Donalbain. She thought quickly. "Only a fool goes unarmed," she pointed out. Seaton laughed. "I would not have thought you would even dare hold a knife. But I have a commission to carry out, and I cannot take you with me. Return to the baggage train." Seaton reached down and plucked Mary's dirk from its place at her waist. "I don't want to ride back alone," she pleaded. "The moor is frightening. I'm scared. Please come back with me." Seaton sighed. Mount up, he said. But when she was astride her little pony, he took Mary's reins from her hands. It left her powerless. "We're going back?" she cried. "Oh, sir, thank you. You are so kind." "I'm not going back. I have to put you somewhere until I'm done, and I know just the place. I shouldn't be so surprised. The weird ones must have led me there. Not once, but twice, so I'd remember." "What do you mean, until you're done?" said Mary. "Done doing what?" "It is best for you not to know." They rode on in silence. A strange, tower-like place appeared. If ever there was a place where the weird ones lived, this was it. A bent, slick, unstoned tower contrived of some witchly material. No, it was a hollow tree, blasted by lightning, its centre burned out. Like Lady Macbeth, thought Mary. "You'll be safe in here," said Seaton. "You're going to crawl through that tiny opening. I'm going to wedge this fallen limb in the hole so nothing can get in there with you, and you're going to sit here quietly until I come back. It won't be long." If Mary was shut up in there, she could not save Lady Macduff. Flirting and pouting had not achieved Mary's ends. Perhaps lying would. "I know you're going to arrest Lady Macduff. The Queen was talking about it. I understand the King's rage. Of course he loved Lord Macduff, and he feels betrayed, and he has been betrayed, but—" Seaton twisted her arm behind her back and yanked the bones viciously upward. "You didn't come for love, then?" He would gladly break her arm. Mary tried to save herself. "Of course I love you. What else would give me the courage to be alone on the moor except knowing that soon I would be with you? But when you tell Lady Macduff what her husband has done, there should be a woman to attend her. I can help. You will be glad to have me." Seaton regarded her silently. She had almost convinced him. "Lady Macbeth loves Lady Macduff," Mary lied. "The Queen wants dear Lady Macduff to be all right. She suggested I should come after you, to care for their little chicks." "Really?" said Seaton. "That's interesting. I would not have said the Queen cared about other people's children. She once said to me that she would dash her own baby's head against a wall if that was what it took to get power." "She did not," cried Mary. "That's a terrible thing to say." "She's a terrible woman," said Seaton. He seized Mary like a sack of barley and began shoveling her into the hole. Mary fought back, and he started to grin. He liked struggle. The struggle began to take on another aspect. It was better to be where Seaton could not touch her. Mary slithered inside the tree, beyond his reach. The inner sides were slick and black, like some awful pot on some awful stove. There were no protrusions she could hang on to or climb up. The jagged, ugly top of the oak was many feet above her head. "Will you give my love to Lady Macduff?" Mary quavered. Seaton's voice was farther away. "I'm not sending her love. I'm not taking her prisoner." The owl wins against the wren. In the witch's song, I am not the wren, thought Mary. Lady Macduff is. Nor is Macbeth the owl. Seaton is. What do owls do to wrens? Tear them to pieces. Chapter 12. There shall be done a deed of dreadful note. Act 3, Scene 2. The heavens split open in a storm so brutal that Mary was bruised by the rain. The wind screamed through a knothole in the vast trunk. No wonder the sides were slick as glass, if for decades they had been worn down by winds like this. She wept. In this world of evil, it was hard to find that glad stone on which to stand. "St. Hilda!" She shouted over the din of the storm, "St. Margaret, save me! Let me out!" Lightning struck. The tree was used to this. Mary was not. Thunder crashed in her ears. Fire leapt up in her face. Smoke filled her lungs. How did you dare to trade and traffic with Macbeth in riddles and affairs of death? Act 3, Scene 5. Seaton's horse was nervous of its footing across all the rock and cleft and stone. It was a relief to reach a smooth green meadow, but the chestnut stallion would not cross it. Seaton kicked hard, but the horse shied and tried to disobey. Seaton was sick of disobedience. Who would have guessed that stupid little Lady Mary would dare charge after him? And then to lie, to pretend love, even pretend weakness, when all along she had armed herself with a dirk. She had hurt him. How dare she? She would pay. Seaton whipped his horse. It tried to throw him. He hadn't let Mary throw him off, and he wasn't letting some stupid horse do it. He kicked and whipped and hauled on the reins, and finally, forward into the green grass the stallion ran, and the soft earth became a bog, and the horse sank. Seaton screamed to the weird ones for help before he realized they were the force dragging his horse down. "I'll give it to you," he shouted. "Whatever you want. What do you want?" But if they answered, the screams and grunts of his horse drowned them out. The horse was already sunk to its knees, thrashing harder, sinking faster. If I don't let my hands or feet puncture the surface of the swamp, if I keep myself long and spread out and weightless, keep rolling and moving, I can get out of here. Seaton almost prayed. Then he laughed. He had stepped too far away from prayer to use it now. Wisdom? To leave his wife? To leave his babes? Act 4, Scene 2. Mary expected to be burnt to cinders, but when the fire ended, the only sign that lightning had struck was another slash in the tree. The tiny slot through which Seaton had forced Mary now went all the way up the great trunk. Mary stepped out onto the moor and was free. Her pony trotted over, as if it had been waiting all this time. She slid out of her gown, filthy now with mud, rain, and smoke. From her pack, still hanging by the saddle, she took the prince's trousers, tunic, cape, and cap, and then stuffed her gown into the bag. She was exhausted from fear, cold, and hunger. She rubbed her eyes, and her hand came away black. She was sooty from the lightning fire, but that was good. It was a disguise. It was possible that Seaton's stallion, a magnificent charger in battle, would be terrified by this lightning storm. Seaton might have to seek shelter until the storm passed by. But Mary rode a Highland pony, which knew by instinct where to put its fat little hoofs. She nestled down into its tangled mane and whispered, "Go like the wind." They hurtled through the mist, came out into daylight, and found the road. Not one hoofprint marked the mud ahead of them. Seaton was behind her. Seaton did not plan to arrest Lady Macduff, so what was he going to do? Surely he would not kill her, thought Mary. She is an innocent. I wasn't killed when my father turned traitor on his king. They cannot execute Lady Macduff just because her husband turned traitor on this king. And then ahead she saw Falkland, a very different castle from any Mary had ever occupied. There was a tower into which the occupants could bolt when they were threatened, and whose doors they could seal, but all the living spaces were open to the world. There was not even an enclosed courtyard. Never mind gates and battlements, parapets and moats. 2 huge stone buildings stood at angles to each other, making a sheltered L for gardens and horses and, above all, children. The children were scampering over the grass, which was strewn with toys and balls and fishing rods. Pet geese wore ribbons, and puppies tripped over one another. The children rushed to greet her. "We just had another visitor," cried one. "Are you a boy or a girl?" asked another, eyeing Mary uncertainly. "You need a bath," said a third one. "But stay," said the first. "Our other visitor, Uncle Ross, he wouldn't stay." "Lord Ross was here," said Mary. How many people were rushing over the heath, racing through storms, trying to reach Falkland first? "Lord Ross explained how our father went to join the King of England," said the oldest child proudly. "Which is not a good thing," said the tiniest. "He should be here, keeping us safe." "Papa isn't a traitor, is he?" demanded the middle child anxiously. "No," said Lady Macduff, striding out of the castle, although by Mary's definition it was no castle, just a very large stone house. What had Lord Macduff been thinking to leave his chicks at a defenceless place like this? "Cawdor was the traitor, not my husband." "And who are you?" said Lady Macduff, frowning at Mary, as well she might. A filthy, mud-spattered, horse-stinking boy in clothes far too big. "I am not known to you," said Mary, although this was not true. Lady Macduff had known her father, Cawdor, well. If Mary admitted that she was his daughter, Lady Macduff wouldn't listen to a word she said. So Mary skipped that part of the story. "I am merely a messenger. I have come to warn you of danger. The world is against you, as it is against all who are gentle and good." "So I've heard," said Lady Macduff irritably. "My brother told me that my husband, who ought to be here at my side, took it into his head to go to England. Even the wren stays at the nest to defend her babies from the owl. But did my husband stay? No. Did he think of us? No. Does he love us? No." "He does love you," thought Mary. "He talks so often of his wife and chicks." "Lady Macduff, since the owl does win against the wren, you must leave. It is known that you are here. Go to another of your castles. This is unsafe. Or get into that tower and bolt it and let no man into your home." "No, this is my home, and here we stay. This ugliness abroad in Scotland will cease eventually. I do not run. Running is for cowards." "You must run. Evil comes upon you." "I have done no harm," snapped Lady Macduff. "But I remember now, I am in this earthly world where to do harm is laudable folly, and to do good is sometimes dangerous. But I refuse to be afraid, and I refuse to run." "Your tower is part of your home," pleaded Mary. "Lock yourselves in there." "No, my home is open to friends and neighbours." "But it is also open to your foes. Macbeth is killing people who oppose him." "I do not oppose him. I have no foes. I am not involved in politics. I do not care who is king. I have no opinions on anything except how to rear my children." "And they will hurt you," shouted Mary, "because they cannot hurt Macduff himself." "Nonsense. Now you look terrified. If you're going to run, boy, run. Here, take some oatcakes for your journey." The oatcakes were on a plate, probably meant for the children to share. They were beautiful children, full of talk and light. Mary ached to stay. What a pleasure their chatter would be after the terrible months with the Queen. Mary offered the plate to the children, but they shook their heads, so she stuffed the oatcakes into Malcolm's bag and climbed back on her pony. Far down the road, she spied somebody striding on foot toward Falkland. Seaton would be on his stallion. A peasant walking on a path was no worry. "Fly," she begged Lady Macduff. "Let others run," said the lady. "Thou art the best of the cutthroats." Act 3, Scene 4. Seaton's hands were damp and cold. He kept wiping them on his riding trousers, unable to forget what he had done with those hands, unable to clean them, unable to get rid of the scarlet, sticky dripping of blood. He walked faster, pounded harder, went uphill and down, but he remained chilled. He wondered vaguely if there had been enough heat and sun this summer for a good harvest, or if there was to be famine in the land. It was a terrible beginning for the reign of King Macbeth. Going back across that green, boggy land was a nightmare. Every time he put a foot down, he wondered how far it would sink. Sometimes he threw rocks at the grass, testing. His magnificent chestnut, not his really, but Macbeth's, was gone forever. Or so he assumed. He hadn't looked back to see if the horse had got out of the mire. Walking as if he were some kern made him furious. His own terror made him even more angry. Once he got back to that hollow tree, he would ride Mary's pony. Let her walk. She deserved it. Seaton spent a sleepless night on a high rock, using his boots for a pillow. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the eyes of Lady Macduff at that terrible moment when she realized what was going to happen. But if he didn't close his eyes and stared up at the starry night, her soul drifted above, watching him. In the morning, Seaton trudged on. Around noon, he found the hollow tree right where he had left it. Had he expected it to move? Had he thought the weird ones could take their tree with them? Lady Mary was still sitting inside the hollow, but it was a different tree from the one he had left, and she was a different girl. The tree itself had been riven in half. Mary was covered with soot and mud. "Lightning?" he asked, walking right in. Mary did not speak. She looked stunned, as if the lightning had hit her too. That happened sometimes. People didn't always recover their wits. Well, if she turned out to be a fool, he would still get her land and title. Her little shaggy pony shied away every time Seaton got close. He forced Mary to catch her own pony. The pony wasn't big enough to carry both of them. Their pace was slow. The girl couldn't or wouldn't pick up her feet. They came to a burn whose cold, clear water pooled between high banks. "Clean yourself up," Seaton ordered. A lady should be pleasing, not revolting. Even in her stupor, she would probably not strip with him watching, so he led the pony to a mossy spot from which he could keep an eye on the high banks and make sure she couldn't escape, but where she could duck down out of his sight. He was starving. Maybe there was food in the pack hanging from the pony's saddle. From the crown to the toe, top full of direst cruelty. Act 1, Scene 5. Mary kicked off her useless shoes, full of holes from the day's hard walk, and plunged fully clothed into the water. It was frigid. She squealed in shock and dunked herself all the way under. Bending over, she dipped her hair up and down to scrub and rinse, and then scrubbed her body inside the wet tent of her gown, and scrubbed the gown last, leaving it on. When she came out of the water, the wind bit savagely through the wet material. She would freeze unless they started walking right now. Her hair began to curl as soon as it began to dry, little tendrils and corkscrews lifting themselves. She swung her head to flip it behind her. The cold had somehow awakened her senses. She was not sure this was a good thing. Seaton was sprawled on the ground, eating Lady Macduff's oatcakes. He held up the pack. "The royal insignia," he said, "is cut into this leather." "One of the princes left it behind in my room. I've been using it." Seaton reached into the pack. Too late, she saw that he was snarling. Just so had Macbeth looked at Fleance the day that Banquo rode off to die. Seaton pulled out the filthy trousers she had worn on her ride to Falkland. He flung them to the ground, pulled out the tunic, the boots, the cap, and then hurled the pack after them. It was you, on this pony. You little traitor. You rode to Lady Macduff to tell her to hide from me. Mary almost clapped her hands. Lady Macduff had run to safety. She probably taunted Seaton from that impregnable tower, while he had to stand there on the grass and kick the children's toys. She is just a woman, Mary reminded Seaton. She doesn't matter to a king, and her babies need her. She didn't do anything wrong. Her husband is a traitor. If Macduff can't be made to pay the price for betraying Macbeth, she pays. Her husband knew that. Her husband made that choice. Mary moved carefully. She retrieved the filthy clothes and put them back in the pack. She would wear the boots instead of her ruined shoes. Macbeth should have hanged you with your father, said Seaton, but he and his lady were too kind. I'm not kind. I'll be your hangman. Mary pulled on the boots. Seaton now held Arsleif's brooch in his hands. Fleance gave this to you, didn't he? Said Seaton, shivering more than Mary, but with rage. Think Fleance will rescue you, do you? You love that worm and not me, is that it? I should have stayed with Lady Macduff, thought Mary. I'd be safe now with her in that tower. But I thought I would be more useful back at the palace. I thought I could save others. I want your lands by rightful law, Lady Mary, so I'll wed you before I hang you. Tonight I'll ask Macbeth for my reward, which is to marry you tonight. Mary couldn't breathe. Why do you deserve a reward? Seaton laughed. Lady Macduff, she whispered. Dead, he said, smiling. And the children? He smirked. You killed the children, she cried. I'll kill anything, said the man she had to marry.